A lot can happen in a week. Some of it good, some of it bad, some of it downright ugly. When faced with intriguing developments in the week's news, we turn to a rotating panel of non-experts to parse the good, the bad, and the ugly of it all. On today's panel, Natalie Arsenault, president of Arsenault International Consulting, Mustafa Tameez, media and public affairs consultant and the CEO of Outreach Strategists, and Charles Kuffner, who writes the Off the Cuff political blog. Natalie, Mustafa, Charles, welcome to Houston Matters.
Howdy.
Thank you for having me.
Good to be back.
Panel Enron is back, except no, it isn't, not really. And this week's apparent parody-inspired effort to resurrect it is being criticized by some Houstonians who don't feel like laughing about the once behemoth of a company built on a house of cards which collapsed, putting thousands out of work and wiping out billions in employee pensions. To back up, Monday, on the 23rd anniversary of Enron's bankruptcy, a news release filled with corporate jargon and purported to be from Enron indicated the company was relaunching to solve the energy crisis. It also posted a video on social media, took out an ad in the Chronicle, and put up a billboard. On its website, a variety of clothes and other products sporting the old Enron logo were being sold. It all does appear to be a parody, which some former employees say is, quote, in poor taste. But I ask you, is it good, bad, or ugly? Mustafa, start us off.
Ugly. I think for many of us, the Enron is just 23 years ago, who cares type of stuff. But for some who lost their pensions, who lost their livelihoods, who were left in the lurch, this is a painful thing. And for me, this just looks like a marketing, some like attention-grabbing exercise. And over time, something weird has happened, which is our attentions are being monetized. If somebody can get you to pay attention to something, it's worth dollars. And I don't know if I like it. It just seemed in poor taste. I really didn't feel that way, but I ran into somebody who had worked there. Just talking to them, I realized how much it impacted people's lives. Right? To me, it was just like, there was an Enron building and then there was an Enron building. It didn't really matter that much to me. But to some people in our town, it was life-changing in a really bad way. So for those, I think this has been ugly. And so I kind of stand with them.
Okay, good, bad, or ugly? Natalie Arsenault.
I think it's ugly, but for slightly different reasons. I mean, I agree with Mustafa's initial reasons, but I also think it's ugly because I think what this shows us is what's happening in media, or rather what's not happening in media, which is the required research to know whether something is an actual prank or reality. I mean, like legit national news agencies were carrying the story and the headlines read like it was a real thing. And when you open the story, none of them suggested it was a prank initially. None of them, they were all like, this is a real thing. And I'm like, oh my God, well, who is really doing the news now? Because if they aren't doing the research to figure out if something is a prank or not, that's a fundamental problem with our journalism in America. So for me, it's ugly for all the things that Mustafa articulated. But then also an added layer to me is that what is happening with media and journalism and news and the ability to research and like really put out legit, meaningful stories that have the actual facts and not like purported pranksters and things. Ugly.
In some cases, it's quite likely articles were written where there was no journalist involved. And if there was, there are probably some that are working right now who weren't even alive when Enron collapsed. So
that is true.
Context and lack of history and all of that seems to be missing as well.
That is true. But I'm going to want our journalists, no matter how old they are, to do the research.
Fair enough. Good, bad, or ugly? Charles Kuffner.
I hear and I understand and agree with what Mustafa says about the effect on the people who work there. I still kind of find it funny, I have to confess. And for what it's worth, the coverage that I saw did suggest the possibility of, did find the bits about satire. The first site I saw it on was Mediaite, and then they didn't lead with it, but they did point out in the guts of what was there that it did say satire. It was connected with the, birds aren't real. I mean, I do think that it was out there in the coverage, Maybe not what you read, but in what I read, it did.
All right, to that end, Natalie, you've been raising your eyebrows as Charles has said that. What sites did you
CBS
look
News
up?
is what she's
CBS
showing me.
News,
Yeah.
AP News has kind of cleaned up their act like a day ago, and now they're like, oh, if it's a joke, if it's a joke.
Yeah, I mean,
like, why would you have a headline
I think
with, if it's a joke?
I think
like,
what you
know
get,
it's a joke.
I think what you get in some cases is,
Clickbait for
Well,
one, and then the headline of
they're-
satire is buried.
right. They're reporting on the stories they've read, not necessarily doing the work themselves. And whatever.
Now Houston did better because like KHOU and the Chronicle so local news was like, haha, yeah. But I'm concerned about our national news coverage of it.
Yeah, and the people that kind of did it, like some of the stuff was that they also claimed like birds are, spies for the government, like this conspiracy theory type of shenanigans that people are part of on the internet, right? So I necessarily don't want to reward people and buy merch from them if they're in the business of catching our attention and using that to their means, and then also pushing around misinformation. It's partly like I think they did this in a way where for other people they wanted to make it look real, right? So they wanted a spoof.
Yeah.
I will say also,
Yeah.
let's not forget, they have bought 3 or 4 full-page ads in the Chronicle and a billboard. Someone's writing a check for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
there's-
but that's
there's-
an ad, and I'm okay with an ad.
My point being that either this is someone spending money on it, not expecting to get it back, or someone spending money as an investment, hoping to make it. My point is that the presence of that money means this isn't just nothing. There is a financial interest behind this somewhere.
Yeah, and that's what I mean, like the attention, right? Like
Yeah.
somebody's monetizing our attention.
Correct.
And they got our attention of something that's emotional. When you give you attention, I can sell you something.
And I think you hit on it when you talked about the merchandise that's for sale on the website.
Yeah.
And that reminds me of how we seem to now be in this society that values intellectual property, logos, you name it, anything that is recognizable as a thing, slap it on a T-shirt or a whatever.
And that intellectual property was available for peanuts. I mean, any one of us in this room could have bought that for a week's worth of lunch money. The biggest investment is probably, like I said, the billboard and the Chronicle ads.
Yeah.
Panel, Houston will soon see more driverless vehicles on its roads. The self-driving car company Nuro says its latest expansion in Houston of zero-occupant vehicles will be powered by an AI driver system and will be able to operate on multi-lane roads at speeds up to 35 miles per hour. Nuro further claims its cars will be able to react to active emergency vehicles, navigate construction zones, respond to school buses, and operate at night. As Houston Public Media's Kyle McClenigan reported Wednesday, Nuro first started operating in Houston in 2019 in partnership with Kroger to provide grocery delivery in some areas. While it will continue to use those vehicles with safety drivers, the company tells Houston Public Media its expansion will include some new vehicles that operate entirely without a person inside. Nuro is one of 2 automated vehicle companies operating in Houston. The other, Cruise, relaunched its self-driving fleet in June of last year. It had paused operations after an accident in San Francisco where one of its vehicles struck a pedestrian and dragged them 20 feet after they were hit by another car. A Texas law passed in 2017 currently prohibits cities from regulating driverless vehicles. More self-driving cars are headed onto Houston roads. Is this good, bad, or ugly? Natalie.
I'm so torn.
Good, bad, or ugly?
I know, right?
We're giving you 3 choices.
Don't feel limited by the choices. Come up with your own adjective.
Thank you.
You have free will.
I know. I don't know. I think it's a blend of all of them. Look, I think that the driverless vehicles serve a purpose. Do I want to be on the same streets with the driverless vehicles? This is where we start to move into the ugly side of things. I'm not that trusting. Consider me the Will Smith of iRobot. I'm not that trusting of the things that are being programmed. I don't think we've done enough around safeguarding look, the cruise got in trouble because it had an accident and drugged somebody. And that wasn't that long ago. It hit a pedestrian and struck somebody 20 feet, and that wasn't very long ago. So I'm just not very trusting of having absolutely hands off, no person inside the vehicle. If something goes haywire, its wires get crossed, whatever. I mean, my Microsoft laptop goes haywire at least once a week. I get a blue screen. So I'm a little concerned about this being on our, and we have enough to deal with traffic by itself. And, people from other places arriving here who don't know how Texans and Houstonians drive, and all of that coming just seems like a perfect storm for an increase in accidents. So I'm a little concerned. And I'm trying to also figure out what's the outcome of this. Like, I get the Kroger's delivery piece of the puzzle. That's great. But so we're gearing up to just have driverless vehicles and people can buy them and then ride around. And that is also very, very concerning.
I not only don't trust driverless cars, I don't trust any cars that have drivers in them.
That too. I
just don't trust any of them.
I don't trust any of them, and I don't know which one is better or worse. But yeah, and when we say they're not regulated, when I think of unregulated, I'm just like, is it just the cowboys out there just running amok?
It means that cities can't regulate them. The state of Texas could do it, but they're saying cities aren't allowed
And we
to.
know the state of Texas is great at that sort of thing.
Well, and I'm okay with that part, but
It's a big an argument for regulation. I'm just listen to this.
What's the parameters of the non-regulation? Are we saying that they can't get pulled over and cited for speeding or for running a red light?
I'm sure they can. The question then is who gets the ticket.
Yes.
All right, good, bad, or ugly, Charles.
I mean, I'm ambivalent on it. I mean, there is plenty of evidence to suggest that, for the most part, autonomous vehicles are just not ready for prime time yet. It's not just the accident that the Cruise vehicle had, but there's plenty of evidence to show that they still don't do well in poor weather or poor visibility. They don't react well to bicyclists and pedestrians. They don't react well to other unusual circumstances. Sometimes things go wrong, just like with their routing algorithm. I mean, there's stories of neighborhoods where Cruise or other autonomous vehicles operate, where you have a parade of them going through cul-de-sacs because something went screwy with where they're routed. They've had trouble with emergency vehicles, as you've said. So all of that is true, but I think it's also true, even as a skeptic of autonomous vehicles, they have gotten better over time, and I think it is going to be the case that they will be perfectly serviceable. And yeah, human-powered vehicles, I mean, they kill thousands of people a year.
True.
If we get them to a certain base level of performance, replacing human drivers is going to make the road safer. Now, again, I don't know if that's now. I'm quite certain that it's not now, but it will be in probably the next 5 years, 10 years on the outside, maybe.
Oh my God, say it ain't so.
I think that number's got to go up a little higher.
Well, maybe, but again, I think here the bar is low because people are terrible drivers.
Well, that is.
I mean, I'm not saying they're going to be Commander Data from Star Trek. I'm saying they're going to be better than that idiot who just cut you off on 59, because there's plenty of them. So, I mean, again, I don't have a business case for using an autonomous vehicle. I'd rather take mass transit than call a ride share if I can do it. I don't order groceries or takeout. I'd rather go to the grocery store myself. I'm able-bodied, so I can do that. But, if you are disabled, you might want someone to come out of the car and bring your groceries to your front step, or if, you're doing this when it's 30 degrees and sleeting outside. What you mean? I got to go out to the car and get the groceries in? Thanks. I guess what I'm saying is I think there's still a lot of questions and cases for this that haven't been fully thought through.
Maybe they could deliver it directly into your kitchen. Now, you might have to do some repairs afterwards.
I was going to say. But, I do think this is coming. It's probably coming sooner than you want to think. And, one way or the other, we need to be ready for it.
What will the cities do for revenue generation from all of the traffic violations if we're all driving driverless vehicles?
Another interesting question.
Maybe they can redeploy some of the traffic cops to, solving crimes.
To actually solve some crimes. I'm here for that.
Yeah.
All right, good, bad, or ugly, Mustafa.
It's good, but first, as soon as you said bad drivers, all three were looking at me. It's just not right.
You're just sitting across the table from me, Mustafa. I
Just
couldn't
not
help
right.
it.
What's funny is none of us actually were, but in your mind, we were.
That's right.
So maybe it's a guilty conscience.
Probably, yeah. Well, look, I think it's good, and I will. I've kind of worked with some of these companies, and so I've learned a lot in that process. Charles brought up a really good point. There was an event that happened with a group called Haven and Cruise, where they brought people in to kind of understand how people that are blind or visually impaired would use the cars, driverless cars, to get around. And the person who was leading that meeting said something really, he said, like, this is independence to me. For the rest of you, it might be innovation, it might be interesting, but for me, this is independence. And it really kind of, the light bulb went in my head going like, yeah, for the rest of us, it's kind of like, yeah, I'm driving, there's a driverless vehicle, all those type of things. I think earlier show we talked about this where we had the light rail for the first time. We had bunch of these accidents because people just didn't know there was rail in Houston. And then that happened for the first couple of weeks. And after a while, people figured out what it was and humans understood there's light rail, and next thing you know, those accidents just kind of went away. And same thing with this. Like if it's a driverless vehicle and you're driving, you don't see anybody there. You're looking to see who's in there, and now you're, like those type of things will happen, and it takes technology a little bit to advance. But this means a lot to people in a big sprawl-out city like ours, with transportation costs what they are, insurance what it is, to get from point A to point B. A lot of people don't have a grocery store close to them, and they're elderly. They don't know how to get there. So this will bring the cost down for a lot of people that need basic transportation.
You think auto insurance will go down?
No. I meant like the cost of transportation is high, including auto insurance as part of that cost, right? Like it's high for all of us. So
I question, though, the cost. I mean, it is true not having a driver is cheaper than having a driver. But think about like Uber's business model. Uber doesn't own the cars, right? The drivers own the cars. Uber doesn't pay for any of that. Well, if you now switch from the Uber model of a driver going around in their car that they paid for to give you a ride to a driverless car, well, that means Uber has to own that car. Uber has to maintain it. Uber has to store it someplace when it's not on duty. Uber has to fuel it.
Maybe, or drivers who own driverless cars can put their cars on the app.
Maybe some of that will do, but
to some extent.
But I mean, I would not overestimate the number of people who would do that. Most people, it's like, that's my car. I want it available when I need it, even if most of the time I'm just sitting in my office or at home.
Right. Yeah.
I don't think people are going to do that as an investment for themselves. I don't think that's going to work out. I guess what I'm saying is I have long questioned the economic model for this because it's so different than the current model we have now. And I don't see that get discussed very much.
Not too long ago, I was at City Hall, and there was a group of cab drivers really protesting Uber coming into town. And their whole argument was, this is dangerous, this is bad. The yellow cab companies are the thing. And there were a lot of people that said, oh my God, we're changing this thing, we're changing it too fast, we don't know what'll happen. And now it's become part of our life, right? I think this is not that different. This is going to become more and more part of our life. Just imagine the biggest accidents on the roads are with cars hitting trucks. That's basically like if you look at fatalities, it's on the freeway and it's truck drivers trying to get from one side of the country to the other side of the country, and how much safer it'll be when these things become better
I don't know if it's going to be safer, though. I think in theory it's safer. Like you have multiples of the same thing all programmed the same way to do the same thing, then theoretically it's safer. My concern is that they can't even keep my picture safe on the cloud. This is such a hackable system, and my question is, should some crazy whatever person decide that they want to hack into Neuro's system or Cruise's system or whatever, right? Now you're not the one in control of the car, and the car can do whatever, and there's no driver to take evasive measures.
I'm less worried about Uber being hacked. I mean, really, you should worry about like your healthcare system being hacked.
Like your pacemaker.
But I'm concerned about that too. Like I have concerns about people's pacemaker. I'm like, that's the easiest way to kill somebody. But
also to address a point Mustafa brought up, you're right. Cabs mostly have largely or to some extent gone away and replaced by Uber and soon by Cruise, but that wasn't so great for the cabbies. I mean, you can make a living as a cab driver. No one's making a living as an Uber driver.
Well, unless you're in New York City and it's $1 million to get a medallion.
Let me see.
right?
I grew up in New York.
So
Normal
did
people
I.
didn't own the medallion,
Yeah,
right?
I
There was
understand.
$250,000 in the beginning, and then it was $2 million towards the
Correct.
end. It's not a business.
it's not
Cab
a
business
business.
is not for the cab drivers, for the people that own the cab company.
Correct.
but
the
you-
opposition wasn't cab drivers; it was the people that own the cab companies.
and-
But New York is also kind of an outlier.
Right here in
there.
Houston, it was the cab ownership that makes money. It's not the driving the cab.
Well, and honestly, Uber and the cab driver thing, I don't know if that was such a great, significant milestone of an innovation, right? Ultimately, you still have a cab driver. The only difference is that instead of you picking up a phone and calling the cab company to say, hey, bring me my, I need to be picked up at 3:00 at this corner, you can now go into an app and tell it, and then a driver still comes to get you.
Before
right?
we go any further, because I know I'll get emails about this, yes, we are also aware that existing cab companies have apps themselves. And
They do
Yes,
now.
they do.
And
Good job,
and there's
Craig.
more
Good
than
job.
Uber. There's Lyft and all the things. Yeah.
do not contact
so
us.
all they did was automate the process. It's still the same thing, right? You still have a driver that is coming to retrieve you based on a request.
You're right. Uber drivers don't need a $1 million medallion to start driving, but it's also the case that most of the money that goes to your Uber ride, it's not going to the driver, it's going to the investors.
Except for the tips.
Yeah, but it's still the case that the bulk of it is going to the investors. It's not going. It's not going to labor.
But
I
I
got
mean
it, but-
that's the American model in general. I'm like most of the profit goes to those who own the thing,
And
and the
that'll be
people
even
who are
more the
doing
case
the
with
work
autonomous
get
vehicles.
less,
And
right?
I think, look, autonomous vehicles on the ground is coming. It's coming faster than most people realize. And autonomous vehicles on, like the air taxis
Yep.
are too, right?
The air
the
taxis.
Whisk Arrow,
Yep.
the people we work with have created that element of it. So this whole thing of autonomy is moving very rapidly. And those that own like Teslas, got an app pushed down to them for months. Usage of the autonomous vehicle app on Tesla has been wildly successful. And I don't know if anybody sits in a Tesla that self-ed is pretty remarkable at how good it is. And I've been kind of watching, is there litigation? Are there people getting sued? Are there people getting run over? And it's been out for 6 months. It's the best autonomous thing that I've seen. Nobody's heard about it, right? So it's going well. So this is rapid growth in this industry. And for a city like ours, it makes a lot of sense because we don't have as much public transportation and we are spread out. And there's a lot of people that don't have the means to have a car, but they still need to get from point A to point B, and I think this will help.
I don't see the driverless cars being cheap.
Long term, it's going to be cheaper
'Cause
than
at this
a
point,
driver.
regular
right?
cars
Like,
aren't cheap.
Yeah,
But it won't be cheaper than the bus.
but it may come to your house. Like so, if you're visually
if you're
impaired, if you're disabled,
disabled, or-
there's a
yeah.
lot of people. And if you're
Yeah.
older, if you can't carry stuff,
Definitely.
all sorts
Definitely.
of things.
Yeah, definitely. There's an audience.
I, for one, welcome our robot overlords. Okay.
Craig's is trying to get in good with them before they get here.
That's right.
Kiss out.
Yes.
I like my robot.
He just thinks it's futile.
Coming next, hostless talk shows on radio.
You didn't realize you've been talking to the Craig Cohen 3000 computer for the last 10 years. Natalie Arsenault is president of Arsenault International Consulting. Mustafa Tameez is a media and public affairs consultant and the CEO of Outreach Strategists. And Charles Kuffner writes the Off the Cuff political blog. Natalie, Mustafa, Charles, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Craig.